It speaks to the critical nature of this next panel that almost every seat in this aula, in this hall, is filled. The fundamental question over these next roughly 90 minutes is, how do we power a global economy in flux? As we're moving away from fossil fuels, who so long have been the bane of our extractive industries, toward, and many of you will have been in the discussions across the hall, a real circular economy, what we might shorthand as reduce, reuse, recycle. We're also moving into a world in which we need yet other critical material inputs. You heard some of it this morning: copper, lithium, cobalt. And that intersection of energy needs and geopolitics is extremely vivid when we look to China planning to use some of its withholding of critical raw materials from the global market in an effort to increase its strategic role. Or when we think about the 12.5 trillion critical raw materials are in the earth in Ukraine, and whose hands might those fall into? But also, how can we, as we transition and move our economies into more innovative thinking with respect to our energy use, the power that is the furnace of our industries, how do we not forget about those who we're forcing to change from one element of a workforce into another workforce? How do we move them on regeneratively, as we heard this morning? And then finally, how do we avoid making the kind of mistakes that we made in pushing extractive industries early, creating a more equitable, a more just, a more evenly spread way of distributing the resources, the few resources that remain on this precious planet we co-inhabit? Those are the critical, vital questions which this next panel is going to have answers to, or so we hope. Matthias Tauber, who is Managing Director at Boston Consulting Group, will lead us in the discussion with this excellent panel.
Great. Welcome, everyone. It's fantastic to see a full audience. I realize we're the last thing between an exciting day and a hopefully relaxing dinner. So I promise it's going to be very, not just entertaining, but hopefully really, really interesting. As Catherine said, my name is Matthias Tauber. I'm BCG's head of Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and South America. And before that, I led BCG's metals and mining sector. So I deal with critical resources also on my day job, and I'm really, really glad to be here. Now, critical resources in the global energy transition, that's the topic we're talking about today, and there is a link to geopolitics. I think many of you have been here in the session before. It's obviously also, in a way, resources are becoming a battlefield of global geopolitics. And it's resources across the energy transition, but it's resources also in other areas, such as food. And on the energy transition, just to give a few numbers to orient us, we're talking a huge industry. The top 10 critical minerals, they represent an industry of $920 billion, so it's huge. The top 3, which is lithium, copper, and nickel, are $400 billion alone. And demand is rising. If you think about a normal wind turbine, 3 kilowatt capacity, it's 5 tons of copper. You need 10 tons of copper for every ton of kilowatt, or for every kilowatt productive capacity. So demand is rising, and supply is getting more contested. We talked about geopolitics. Think about countries such as Peru. So it is a more contested supply landscape. But on the other hand, we have innovation. We have deep sea mining. We will talk about that. We have circular economy. Katrin touched on it before. So a really exciting topic, and I'm very happy to be joined by a really exciting panel. Maybe a few words to each of you, and then you should introduce yourself. So to my left, we have Gerard Barron. Gerard is CEO of Metals Company, and Metals Company is a company specialized in deep sea mining. So you will talk about the solution. Next to you, I'm pleased to see Thaissa Avena. Thaissa Avena is Brazilian. She worked in the Brazilian Ministry of Mines and is currently based in New York at Columbia, where she focuses on communities, on international development, so on the impact which resources have on the other hand. Next to Thaissa, I'm pleased to welcome Alex Cornelissen. Alex is CEO of Sea Shepherd, an NGO who is focused on protecting oceans, not so much from deep sea mining, but more when it comes to resources in the ocean, such as fish, and I'm sure there's lots of interesting learnings to share from that. And then I'm also very, very pleased to welcome on stage Niankoro Yéah Samaké from Mali, former presidential candidate of Mali and former ambassador of Mali, who will bring in the perspective of a resource-rich country who hopefully can contribute as well as a part of the solution. So that's the panel we have, and I'm looking forward to a really exciting discussion. With that, Gerard, you want to kick us off, maybe with a bit better introduction or a longer introduction than I gave, and a few introductory statements from your side.
Happy to. Well, thank you for the invitation to be here. So the Metals Company are very focused on addressing where are the metals going to come from as we transition away from fossil fuels. And it's unfortunate that it's referred to as deep sea mining, because actually what we're focused on is a very large, abundant resource of polymetallic nodules like the one I have in my hand. And they're located in the Pacific Ocean, the resource we're focused on at least, about 1,000 miles off the coast of Mexico. And they literally lie on the ocean floor, like this one in my palm. And the good news is that in here is what we need to power batteries and to build the infrastructure as we continue to industrialize in the developing world. So it's full of nickel and copper and cobalt and manganese. And I think one of the big challenges as we talk about scarcity or abundance, either one, is we want to move away from fossil fuels. We've all agreed that global warming is the biggest threat to our planet, and so we need to use less hydrocarbons. But that means we need to build other forms of energy. We need to build renewable energy, windmills and solar panels. We need to build batteries. We need to electrify the fleet. And we're going to need billions of tons of these materials. And the question is, where are they going to come from? And I think if we take it back to first principles, I have this view that we should be carrying out extractive industries in parts of the planet where there is the least life and not the most life. And where we're focused on is known as the abyssal plain. More than half of our oceans are categorized as the abyssal plain. This one comes from 4,200 meters below sea level. There are no plants. We measure the amount of life there in grams per square meter because all of the food gets eaten as it falls down through the water column. And the alternative, of course, is if you think about the main revenue in this nodule is nickel. And 100% of the growth in nickel supply is coming from rainforest nickel. Now, the problem with that is to get to the metal-bearing ore, you have to remove the rainforest and all of the biodiversity and the sequestered carbon and push out all of the indigenous communities that live amongst it. So it's a real challenge. And so how do we get people focused on what's the true impact of the metals that you're using in your iPhone or in your electric vehicle battery? And how can we come up with a better solution? And so the Metals Company are entirely focused on how to get this resource into production. And for the last 12 years, we've been focused on environmental studies, on life cycle analyses. We've been out there testing our early production systems, and we're hopefully ready to go in 2026.
Wow, very impressive, Gerard. And you were talking, or you were contrasting seabed mining and mining in the rainforest, where communities are heavily impacted. I think that's a good point to hand over, Thaissa, to you. I mean, could you maybe talk a bit about how you feel about the impact on communities?
Yeah, for sure. as we think about renewable energies, we know that it's going to be critical minerals intensive, as Gerard said. And we also know that the mineral activities around the world had left a mark of injustice and environmental issues. So as we navigate this transition, we also need to be very conscious of that. And as a Brazilian, I have felt firsthand how those impacts affect local communities, like in tragedies such as Brumadinho and Mariana, especially for communities of color and indigenous communities, they have huge impacts. And those disasters have eroded our confidence on the mining sector and highlighted the challenges in overlapping conflicts and violence in mining settings, and that's when it comes to local communities as well. So those challenges for local communities usually involve community displacement, water and biodiversity issues, and they all too frequent richness in countries such as ours related to resources. So since critical minerals are the heart of sustainable development, how do we strike this balance between our ecological commitments and our energy necessities? And I always advocate for careful planning and impact assessment and environmental assessment. So we need to be really aware of how those impacts are affecting both losses and gains when it comes to supply options, supply chains, across developing sectors, across different regions around the world, and also across different communities, different racialized communities, especially. So on a practical note, I said that effective governance plays a huge part in this issue, and this includes maintaining robust regulations, engaging communities. People of those communities need to be at the table. They need to be discussing these issues, conducting really thorough impact assessments, and maintaining transparent licensing processes. Also, taxation plays a huge part. I've learned that a lot in Columbia University, where I study. People advocate for that, and I agree that for local communities, local empowerment, for protecting the environment and biodiversity, decision makers also have to pave the way through laws. And I think, in a summary, if I would say that we have to take mining and critical minerals in an environmental, sustainable, but also socially responsible way. So citing back one of my professors back home, that is Lisa Sachs, as we invest in this green mineral mining, we must proceed with our open eyes in order to not replicate the issues and the conflicts and all the problems that arrived in fossil fuels industry previously. So renewable energy must account for that and be socially inclusive and social conscious.
Social conscious, I think that's a good, final word. And I think Katrin said it before as well. Let's not repeat the mistakes. Now, governance play a huge role in sort of making sure we're social conscious. NGOs do so too, right? And Alex, you're CEO of Sea Shepherd, and you're keeping us socially conscious when it comes to another critical resource, which is fish.
Yes, fish, of course, is a very critical resource. It's a source of energy for our bodies. Of course, we as Sea Shepherd wouldn't advocate consumption of fish, but we understand that fish is there and fish is consumed by a large population on the planet. But what we're seeing is that the fish populations are dropping worldwide. There is less and less fish. And not only are the fish populations dropping worldwide, but we're creating these new industries that are actually taking more fish out of the ocean, like farm fish, which is actually using between 1.8 and 4 pounds of fish is being used to create 1 pound of farm fish. So the math is simply not there. You're using more from the ocean to create a product that it just doesn't make sense. What we're also seeing in a lot of our campaigns is that the ocean function as a carbon sink, like krill, for instance. The krill, when they shed their exoskeleton or when they secrete their, it all sinks to the bottom, and the biomass of the krill is so large that it creates a vast carbon sink, and it stays down there for scientists estimate it's between 100 and 150 years. So it's very important to have krill. Posidonia seagrass in the Mediterranean Sea, the same thing. You know, all these are carbon sinks. And of course, we're talking about the rainforest, how important that is to stop global warming. We're talking about energy transition. But we also have to look at the ocean because they serve as a very important part to get that carbon stored on the planet so we don't actually increase the carbon.
Yes.
So that's why it's so important to protect the ocean. And that's what we're doing as Sea Shepherd, as a marine conservation group, working with governments to protect the ocean, to protect the marine environment, and to make sure that we can still breathe air. And
Yes, yes, and I think that's what you're doing. And I understand that here the symposium has offered a vegetarian menu, right? So there is.
yes, I'd like to
protection also.
compliment the symposium for doing that. I understand it's the first time, so huge compliments for doing that.
Yes.
Absolutely. But I must say, I myself am a vegan for 20 years, so I hope that in the future it'll be fully vegan. So,
Or alternative proteins, but we'll come to
alternative
that
protein,
later.
that's a good alternative, yes. Yeah.
Now, if we may move on to a representative from a resource-rich country, any learnings, what is needed sort of to extract the best out of it, or to make the best out of it?
Well, you know, I think that we are focusing most of the time on the wrong solution. In Mali, which is, you name it, we have it. From cobalt, uranium, diamond, gold, hydrogen, lithium. Mali is extremely rich with minerals. But yet, the citizens of our country don't enjoy the benefit of this. Actually, I forgot to mention Lons Delight. If you have not heard about it, this is harder than diamond. This was discovered in 1976 in England, but the name is Lons Delight, if you want to Google it up. Now we're finding this in Mali. It's new. Anyone would like to touch it later, please join me in. Now, what I want to say is we should focus more in efficient transport of energy. Mm-hmm. Mali is 30 times the size of Switzerland. 2/3 of the country is in the Sahara Desert. In the world, 19 countries are located between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, meaning that there is tremendous amount of radiation available. Couple that with a vast land of desert. In my understanding, we can produce sufficient enough amount of energy in Mali's desert and in many other countries in these areas. But transmission line, how do we carry energy where there is abundance to where there is scarcity? That also could be part of the focus, because oftentimes I listen to solutions to scarcity. I don't see focus on the transmission. How to carry electricity or energy from Mali to Switzerland. Singapore, for example, has absolutely no natural resources, but an incredible, efficient city that we can all learn from. So my understanding is to make the abundance of critical elements profitable where they are originated, making sure that we add value to these minerals in countries like Mali instead of transporting them raw, including the lithium that is being made, the gold that is being made. Mali is one of the poorest nations on earth, yet the third producer of gold in all of Africa, the #1 producer of cotton in all of Africa. But yet, we export 98% of our cotton without any added value, without creating jobs in our country, without putting more money in the pocket of farmers. Almost 60% of the gold that is extracted in Mali is refined here in Switzerland. There is absolutely no refinery in a country that is the third producer. It is a paradox.
And what's needed to change that paradox, if you would?
Collaboration. Win-win collaboration. We are in the global village. No country can survive alone. Let us take off the complexes, superiority, greed. Let's see how we can all win. Because no country is free until the others are free too. The wave of immigrants coming to Europe, they're not coming because of the beauty of those places. They're coming to improve their lives. If we can create jobs in Mali, if we can put more money in the pocket of farmers in Mali, in Brazil, in where these resources are coming from, I believe we will reverse the wave of immigration. Yes. We will welcome you with open arms in Mali because opportunities will be there for each and everyone coming from anywhere. Let us add value to it. Let us collaborate.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be accumulating it all in Europe. You have the technology. We need you. We have the resources. You need us. Why should you suffer or should we suffer? It's like we have the meat, you have the fire.
Yes.
Let's come together and grill it.
Yes.
You won't join us, right?
And Niankoro, I love your point about collaboration. I think it's a really good point. Another key point, which is often cited, is obviously ESG, right? And adherence to those standards. And maybe, Gerard, coming back to you on ESG, right? Obviously, mining on the sea sounds great, right? You mentioned sort of there is sort of maybe this is sort of even less impactful on biodiversity and so on than on land, but there is obviously also some challenge to that on the ESG side. What are you, as the CEO of one of the companies active in that space, countering to that?
You know, it's not even maybe less impactful. Like, we're talking about reducing impacts by between 90 and 100%. Yet still, and we've carried out these studies with the help of independent life cycle analysis. We've spent more than $300 million just on our environmental program in the last decade. Yet still, we are challenged in the public discord because we come up against parts of society that, and I really refer to NGOs in particular, but not Alex's, who don't want to see mining on land. They certainly don't want to see a new extractive industry established. They want to stop oil. They want to stop everything. And so I think we're entering this era when we have to face up to some realities and we have to understand that it's all trade-offs. Picking up our nodules and turning them into metals does not have zero impact. It just has a fraction of the impact compared to the alternatives. And so we have to have a really open conversation about that. And unfortunately, you know, the media doesn't help because they like a good story. And they like to talk about controversial, dramatized events. Whereas what we like to do, and we're an SEC-regulated company because we're listed on the NASDAQ, we can only speak truth. And so we've been carrying out this research for the last decade so we can understand those impacts and we can present those impacts back to the international community. And we are regulated by the International Seabed Authority, which represents 168 countries. And of course, when you outsource mining, because no one wants a mine in their backyard, when you outsource mining, you also outsource the regulation and the oversight. And that can come with problems. Whereas here we have an opportunity to develop a resource that is the common heritage of humankind for the first time ever that will be overseen by an organization representing 168 countries. And so I know that the impacts are a fraction. I know this makes sense, but still we have to fight our corner. And that's why I enjoy talking to audiences like we have here today, so we can have open conversations. And I was delighted to see Alex on this panel, because finding a panel where an NGO will sit with me is really challenging, because they just want to say no. They just want to say not impossible. They don't want to have dialogue because, of course, they don't come with alternatives other than degrowth and recycling. And degrowth, we know, comes with horrible consequences, and recycling is something we're committed to, but we've got to work towards that. We've got to earn our way into that category. But it's that environmental impact that captures people's attention, and the good news is we have independent scientific data that points to those impacts. They're not our scientists. We've funded it, but they're world-acclaimed international institutions who we've hired to work on this over the last decade.
Yeah.
And all of those impacts are very, very encouraging, that this is something we should be doing. But it's the public discord that is our biggest challenge by far.
So you're saying you can't have it all, right? But then sort of let's innovate and let's make the best out of it. Thaissa, you served on the Brazilian Ministry of Mines. What would you say, right? I mean, what are the learnings from that time also applied to the journey we are on here?
Let me think without saying too much that I wasn't supposed to say as an ex-employed mentor.
Come on.
It's tricky to navigate because I survived 2 different administrations and 4 different ministers when I was there.
Wow.
So a lot happened. I think many talks were on how can we diversify the supply chain in critical minerals. We know that a few countries are dominating the scene right now in all aspects of the supply chain, from the beginning of it until the end product that arrives in our places, such as the solar panels, the wind turbines. So I believe that many countries are getting together, and those were the meetings that I was part of, on how we can connect and collaborate in that sense. How can we have shared value, shared responsibilities, and access to those markets without a single country dominance? So thinking about the Chinese example, they are in most parts of the supply chain in critical minerals, and they focus on financing and government impact in that arena. So Brazil was trying to understand how it can replicate that. But it's tricky because most of the approaches and the conversations were ensuring that we can be more efficient, that we can be inclusive, and that we don't repeat patterns of leaving developing countries, leaving developing nations without access to the end money. Not only the resources, not only the beginning of the stage, but also providing that for their own communities.
And would you say Brazil got it right during the time you were there, or would you say they're learning?
As I said, a lot happened. Yeah. So I believe that Brazil has a lot on paper right now. It has a lot of initiatives. It has a lot of laws and regulations set in place, but it needs to realize its potential. It needs to actually implement everything that is being discussed, and we are making efforts to do that.
Great, very insightful. Alex, maybe coming to you, we talked about NGOs and the role of NGOs. Any advice to the NGOs we heard earlier to become more effective in the discourse?
Of course, we're an anti-poaching organization, so we're not active in the field that Gerard's company is active in. So we don't really have any other opinion than our personal opinion, because we focus on the legality of fishing. But what we're seeing also is that the media is often portraying the fishing companies like the poor fishermen. Like, why are you going after these poor fishermen? They're just trying to make a living. Whereas the people that we're targeting are not the poor fishermen. In fact, in countries like Liberia, you have the poor fishing community, a country that is destroyed by 2 civil wars and an Ebola pandemic. And they're actually struggling to catch fish because the industrial fishing vessels from China and Europe are actually going into the exclusion zone that is specifically designated for the artisanal fishermen, and they're stealing the fish from the local fishermen.
Yes.
And if it hadn't been for our interference and working with the Liberian government, they would have taken out all the fish in those waters, and they would have destroyed the ecosystem. And then, to come back to the point, you'll have a lot of immigrants leaving from there because there's no food left. So we're talking about food security for the people that really have nothing else to eat in those countries than what is coming from the sea. So that for us is very important. But it shows how often the media is portraying things in a way that they get more reaction from, because it's like the big NGO against the poor fisherman. That's very often not the case.
Yes, and one of the things that is needed to make sort of these value chains on minerals, on food and so on more effective is trust, right? Between many different, between government actors, between companies, between citizens, and NGOs do play a key role on creating that trust. Any advice sort of on what NGOs can do best to create that trust or how to behave best?
I think NGOs need to be, I think it's very often, not just with NGOs, but in general in the world, I mean, you can see it everywhere, we're divided, we're like, you're either in this camp or in that camp. Everything is black and white these days. And I think we need to learn to start building bridges again, because we're burning bridges.
Yes.
And if we want to make this world better, we got to start building the bridges again.
Yes, I think that's a great word. It's a great word. And I think it goes to your collaboration point earlier.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, maybe taking a counterpoint, we see a lot of people trying to build bridges and collaborate. Now, we also see quite a bit of resource nationalism going on, sometimes rightly so, sometimes less rightly so.
Yeah.
Any points from your perspective on that?
Well, leadership. This morning, there was a young lady from India who stepped on my tongue when she said that when we talk about scarcity, oftentimes we forget scarcity of leadership. Leadership scarcity is what is affecting us the most, because we have abundance. Being able to collaborate, being able to leverage, it does not have to be a conflict. There is enough. We just have to find a middle ground. Collaboration within the nation and collaboration between nations is essential. Now, you will call it, nationalism, of course, there's a populist movement trying to push people to one corner, making us believe that the others are the enemies. Our enemies are here in our head. Because, as I said, Mali needs Switzerland for the technology, for the transfer of experience, for the apprenticeship programs. We have something that Switzerland needs, and we bring into your economy. So collaboration is key instead of conflict. So for a nation to break its credibility, because saying you're going to nationalize your resources while you have begged and pushed investors to come in, and now you're taking away security guarantee, it's counterproductive. So what needs to be done, from my understanding, is, for example, to change mentality. That protectionism actually backfires, because those countries who do that are not able to bring in the new technologies needed, for example, in mining. Bringing artificial intelligence in exploration will make it so much precise, so much efficient, that investors will take much fewer risks. The risk will be fewer, and it will encourage investing. So if my country, Mali, for example, were to espouse that kind of collaboration, find a country, it doesn't matter where it is, it doesn't matter what they believe. We are seeking a common objective.
Yes.
Is how to confront our scarcities.
Yes.
And so I will end with this note. Countries in Africa who are aspiring to pull out of bigger ensembles, regional organizations, to fall back on themselves, to create an environment where there's no collaboration, are going to be lagging behind, are going to suffer from not being able to provide for their citizens. In my country today, we have a rotation of electricity where one side of the city will have 6 hours and the other one 6 hours. People are losing jobs. People are dying in hospitals for lack of electricity. It shouldn't be so. We should be exporting electricity.
Yes.
But what is missing? What do we get wrong? Why this paradox? Simply the scarcity of leadership. People are trying to use fear tactics to cling onto power instead of embracing values and principles of democracy. There is no other way to confront these scarcities but good governance, collaboration,
Yes.
exchange of resources. What I have can be traded for what you have. We have enough resources in this world for all of us to be comfortable. I thank you for that.
And Niankoro, I really like your line. It's not a scarcity of resources, it's a scarcity of leadership. In fact, we have an abundance of leadership, but abundance of resources, but to sort of make use of it, we need the resources. I do see that we are at the end of the panel time, and I will shortly open up to the questions, or to the audience for questions. So please do not hesitate to come. I see some questions already, some hands. People are with microphones around. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very inspiring. I would like to address my question to Thaissa and Niankoro, specifically talking about the model of development that we are following. We are pursuing a model of development that is based on scarcity, that is creating scarcity for some countries and prosperity for others, just like you mentioned. Why are we still trying to follow this kind of model? And do you have any insights from your country, from Thaissa's country? Do you have any insights of a new model of development that no longer creates scarcity from some countries, but is based on collaboration, is based on prosperity?
Well, I'll take it on Thaissa. I think that what kind of model? I mean, really, what we have, we can fix what we have. The models that exist today, some are flawed. Of course, there are disparities. But you don't throw the baby with the bathwater. This is not working, let's create a new one. And if that doesn't work, let's create a new one. Where are we going to stop? We have to improve. The world is so smart today that I have no doubt that the disparities that are going on, there's no other option but to confront them. The abuses, the violations we've seen in the past are no longer possible. Any country that wants to focus on abuse, on looting, would be left aside, ethically, but also by the pressure of competition. We are not in the obligation to deal with any country anymore. We pick and choose what is efficient, what fits into our values. So in Mali, for example, I don't brag so much about the current administration, but they're doing some things wrong, is that they set some rules of collaboration. 3 principles that First, any country that wants to deal with Mali has to respect our integrity, that we have the choices of our strategic partners, and that any collaboration has to respect the best interests of the people. Once those three conditions are met, we are free to deal with anyone. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. So oftentimes we blame others, but in reality, the responsibility is on us. I pledged to my people when I was a candidate in 2023 that if I were elected president, I will bring peace in the nation through the most efficient allocation of the resources, through the most efficient redistribution of powers, public powers, and public resources. In Mali, it's not an issue of religion. It is not an issue of geographic location. It is lack of hope, lack of opportunity to the people. So clearly, of course, bad faith, bad business dealing have affected us. But today, Africa has the strength in its leg to stand up straight and look straight in the eyes of the world and deal with them as equals. Instead of victimizing ourselves, instead of pointing fingers, take responsibility and create jobs for our youngsters. Bring electricity to the rural areas, making sure that everyone profit from the abundance we have. Again, scarcity of leadership.
If I may?
Yes, please go.
By complimenting that, I had the opportunity to travel to the Amazon region a few years ago, and we were discussing possible renewable energy scenarios, and indigenous and traditional communities were not at least interested if it's blue or green hydrogen, if we are reducing the carbon emissions. They were interested in knowing if their air is going to be polluted, if the water is going to be affected, if scarcity is going to keep happening surrounding all those projects. So I think when it comes to development, we have to consider that the shared value paradigm, like if you're implementing a project in a specific region, what benefits does it make for the local communities, for the resources in that country? So we have to be accommodating those needs when we plan and we think about energy. So are this project bringing electricity to that region? It's bringing revenue, it's bringing jobs, it's bringing opportunities in many senses. So I believe that, I don't know if it's a new type of development, but I feel like it's a hot take on development itself. If it's not shared value, is it valued at all? Yeah.
Great. Very, very insightful. I'm looking at the audience for further questions. Any hands?
I think there's one over there.
Okay, Thaissa, you see better than I. Maybe the people with the microphone. Great.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kalila. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you all for talking. So you mentioned the need for transmission infrastructure upgrades, and these type of things require negotiations across several countries. And I guess my question is, especially with the sort of African way of doing government, how does one person make change with the leadership scarcity? How can one person create that wave that needs to happen?
What's your name again?
Kalila.
Kalila. You know, we all have the potential. I'm a very optimistic person. I believe that we are all change agents. I met a lady from Fransfeld. Yes, Susie here. It's a small village here in Switzerland. But every year, she's able to bring leaders from around the world on her own initiative, no government funding, nothing. And she brings people, including myself, and she created this called the Coalition of the Willing, where we gather annually to share what each individual is doing in his area of specialty to advance the world. But let me tell you this. I studied in America. I went to school in the United States. I had a really good job. I had my home there. My kids were born there. But one day I told my wife that I can't live here anymore. Enjoying the freedoms, the freedom to send my kids to the best schools, the freedom to go to the hospital, the freedom on the best roads, justice, while 22 million people back home are lacking the minimum. My wife is from India. She said, well, I'm not going there. No, she wasn't ready to go. But, she ultimately, one morning I took my luggage and said, well, going or not going, I'm going. Because I couldn't stay there. My conscience couldn't allow me to sit there and not do anything for 60,000 people in my local community. So I ran for mayor. And I came and told the people that I don't have a political party, but I have a heart. I'm leaving everything in America. I'm coming here to be a mayor, being paid about $120 a month. They said, why would you do that? My siblings were in tears. They said, well, you sending us money from America. If you come here, you'll be just as poor as we will be. But I said, but, I'm not concerned about my soul happiness. I want to contribute to the community. So I came. My city was ranked 699th out of 703 cities in Mali. With collaboration, with integrity, it was not easy. Some days I would close my office door and cry my heart out. It was so hard. But in the end, within 5 years, we became number 7 in the nation. Wow. In terms of, So for the youngsters here in this university, for the work that you're doing, I am utterly impressed by the theme, intergenerational leadership. We all have the capacity to change, to bring about change in our home, in our business, in our community, in our city, in our country, even in the world. Yes. Don't shrink. You have it in you to enact those changes. You have to believe in it. The young mayor that we saw on the stage today, 27 years old, mayor in Zambia. Boy, that is difficult achievement. Pushing the establishment in Africa. I commend him, but I encourage him at the same time. Please do not underestimate your power. We can each individually bring about our contribution to the change, locally or globally.
Can I comment on the question also?
You should, yes.
Yeah. It's a great comment, by the way. Our experience working, and we're working in 8 African nations right now, 8 countries in Africa. We've been doing so for 8 years. And in those 8 years, we, together with our government partners, arrested 96 illegal fishing vessels. And it's difficult because you're dealing with fishing vessels that are paying money to fish in those countries. And that's revenue to the state. So for us to then go and say, hey, we're going to save the environment, but you're going to lose money because you're not going to get the fishing license anymore, it's very difficult. So what we're told our government partners is that by arresting those vessels, you can fine them, and those fines will then benefit the state. And that way you can actually compensate for the loss that you lose in fishing revenues. But what we didn't realize, for instance, in the country of Benin, when we first started, it was a big 2019. The president got involved. He was very happy. And 2 vessels were arrested. And the ministers came to the president. And the president said, what are we going to do with these vessels? Like, Mr. President, full extent of the law, maximum penalty, $25,000. And it turned out that the law that existed in Benin still dated from when the French ruled the country. They hadn't reviewed or renewed the law. So because of the arrest, 1 year later, 3 more vessels were arrested. The vessels were confiscated, forfeited to the state. The crew were sentenced to jail time, and the vessels were fined 350,000 euros. So law reform happened because of these actions. So that's really important to actually, to empower countries to do the right thing.
High five to you.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. I had one hand here in front. Maybe someone with a mic could come. It's here.
Lisa Jasko, member of Ukraine Parliament. If I may, I want to make a comment since we're talking about environment and behavioral change. And I want to share a few things about Ukraine and how things have changed about our behavior. For instance, when we had this, and we still have a lot of attacks on electricity, when we have blackouts, Ukrainians really started to save the energy. And we really started doing more of the renewables. It just came naturally. And I believe that's a very interesting thing to think about. Another example that I want to mention that is actually very sad, but there is a lot of our territories currently really mined. And one of the activities, and I know that many companies find it as also a business opportunity, is demining. But I think it's very important that it's being done. And just a few more facts that I want to mention. Our flora and fauna and all of the nature really suffered a lot. And even such terrible things happen when there is an attack on Ukraine. Usually, for instance, the animal shelters. Usually there are animals that are maybe not targeted, but they have the heart attacks from the explosions. And I'm just sharing this, that a lot of disasters in the world, including the war, they have a lot of impact on the environment, but also in the behavioral change, and also for business opportunities that can be very important to make a social impact. So I'm just referring it to you in case you're thinking, what good can you do? There are plenty of things that you can do based on that very big tragedies that are happening around the world, not only in Ukraine. Thank you.
Other hands.
There's one over there.
There was one over here. There was one over here. I don't know which one was first. I think there was one here in the back to the left.
Thank you. So we heard from Lisa Jasko that resources are a lot about geopolitics. And my question is also about geopolitics. I worked at Fairtrade, Max Havelaar, and then I learned that gold is the only labeled resource or commodity that Fairtrade sells that there is more demand than supply. And I want to ask the panel, how can we overcome this sort of paradox or gridlock that we have those resources where you will always find a buyer? In the case of gold, there is always a buyer, and there will always be a buyer for lithium in the next 30 years. How can we avoid that countries resource-rich countries turn to countries where less rules are attached to the extraction of those resources?
So your question is about how do we incentivize responsible mining? How do we incentivize countries to do so? You want to give it a try?
Sure, I think it's power to the people. Consumers will end up supporting brands that meet standards, and measuring impacts, whether it's through carbon equalization measures or in the battery material space through battery passports, will be the beginning of how we get an insight into the true impacts of what it's cost to produce those materials. And I think that consumers will then favor brands who do share the benefits, who do have lower environmental impacts.
Yes.
And I think power to the people. But to make those decisions, you have to have reliable information. And that's the problem to date,
And I
that
think-
it's not very transparent.
And I think it is power to the people. And I think to solve or to give power to the people, I do think technology can play a huge role. So if you think about, for example, blockchain technology, and in the case of diamonds, there is blockchain technology available that traces diamond from mine to finger, essentially, and avoids blood diamonds. So it actually gives the power to the people to choose responsibly sourced minerals. And I think there is more to come in other minerals to do so and to create, I think, the environment you mentioned. So I see on the screen we are at the end of the time. Let me sort of use the remaining seconds to thank the panel. Thank you so much. A big applause to all of you. And a big thank you to the audience, and I'm wishing everyone, hopefully, a great evening. Enjoy the rest of the symposium. Thank you.